just for funsies to make it easy. That's recording.
We're recording.
Okay, good. So just for fun this time, I'm going to do this. Good. It's for the audio. It's for the recording.
But we're keeping...
Also ceremony.
Yeah, it's part of the...
Actually, so this is our 100 billionth time trying to get the tech set up. So in the interest of the possibility of maybe not having to splice all this together after the fact, I'm here with my friend Andrei. And we're in Hawaii. We're at Zen Garden. We're having a great time.
Thank you to Zen Garden.
Thank you to Zen Garden for having us. He showed off my book a little bit, and he was in the middle of talking about his lineage. They know what my book looks like. They know what my book... Isn't it? Yeah, that's me. So tell us from the start about you and your Buddhist lineage. And I'll just preface this by saying that the thing that Andrei has been so interesting and so... the reason why talking with him has been so insightful, one of the reasons is that he comes from an intellectual and philosophical lineage, a background, where there's a systematic way of thinking about these things that's quite clear and quite coherent. And what's interesting is he's a Buddhist, but I would say maybe he's not your average Buddhist. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in keeping with that, we've been able to stretch each other's minds having conversations about these things. And we want to have a conversation today eventually about the nature of meaning, I think. We haven't really talked about this. We've just kind of sent some messages back and forth. We want to have a conversation about the nature of meaning, and we'll get to that and whatever else comes up. But I want to hear about your lineage, Andrei, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Connor.
Yeah.
No, we have a great time. Connor and I, every time we sit down, it's like hours of this. Okay, so my lineage, the way that it developed for me was going from the most traditional Buddhism to much more modern Buddhism. So when I first was getting into the field, I figured, let's just figure out what the Buddha has to say, because he was the one that everybody thought was right, and I'll just do exactly what he told us. And that's kind of like the Theravada old school meditation tradition, which I think the core insight for me was the nature of emptiness. This idea that since everything changes, and the core Buddhist doctrine is that everything changes, that there's no inherent soul, anatman, or a coherent thread, because everything's always subject to evolution. But the original Buddhism evolved several times since, because again, change being one of the core fundamentals. There was 3 or 4 major revolutions, big turnings of the wheel of Buddhism, as they say. So one big revolution was this heart-centered revolution of bringing more love into it, not just emptiness, but a genuine compassion and care for other beings. One thing people don't realize about Buddhism is that it was actually quite brutal in a lot of its history, where kind of part of the training might be to really just break the person down until they have no self left. And that might look like moving rocks back and forth across a field repeatedly, just being worked to exhaustion, near starvation.
I'm thinking of, during Buddha's time, I'm thinking of eating 1 grain of rice a day and that whole thing.
Right, yeah, and it was also quite gendered. Women weren't allowed to become enlightened. If you weren't at a monastery, then you couldn't really become enlightened. There was always rules and preconditions, things that you couldn't do. So eventually the big revolution happened 1,000 years ago called Tantra. And Tantra, people kind of misunderstand it, but at its core is this idea that everything is divine and that everything is part of the self. It's not a renunciate style path, where you have to give up a lot of stuff. It's like an inclusion-based path, where everything in the world, dance, sex, drugs, rock and roll, things that were cast out were allowed back in, with the understanding that you can ritualize these processes. And I think this is going to be a big aspect of when we're talking about meaning.
Yeah, that everything can be sacred.
Yeah, and then ultimately one of my top teachers has been Ken Wilber, so a lot of what I bring forward is kind of through the intellectual view of Ken Wilber as best as I can represent it.
Okay, cool. Wow, that was awesome. And I have all these questions, one of them being, isn't it the case that part of the Buddha's major revelation about like turning away from the kind of renunciate ascetic path was that actually no, you like we can like live like you can have kind of boots on the ground and show up in that way, and that's enough. Like that's enough. Isn't that one of the Buddha's revelations? And we're talking about the Buddha himself,
Yeah.
so it's funny that would then continue to evolve and then just gain more clarity over time in the lineage, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely say that's true. It was this like, the Buddha was looking around. He was a prince. He was trained by some of the best philosophers of his era, so he had a huge head start. And his idea was to judge the effectiveness of a spiritual path of philosophy based on the people that are produced. So like, are the people being produced, are they happy? Are they genuinely full of joy and enjoying, dancing through life? And what he found is that kind of like not really, especially the ones focused on asceticism.
Right.
Like people who hold their arm up all day,
right?
For years and years and years.
It gets frozen, yeah.
Yeah, it gets frozen, right? So this like kind of, the middle way was the big breakthrough. And to me, the middle way is just like an algorithm for looking at the extremes of something.
Yeah.
And then like, okay, well, maybe I'd want to be like a full jihadi and not like a full peacenik, but like somewhere in the middle, this kind of idea.
It reminds me of a conversation it's been coming up between Laura Rosgage and I in very recent, the past few days, and it's about standing in the middle of both ends of what we even understand to be like, I know that on the one hand there's this way of being that would feel good to me, and I know on the other end there's everything that my conscious mind is telling me is wrong. And it's like often we're over here. It's totally a tangent, but I love it, right? It's that we feed into the assumption of the self as a kind of like as doing something wrong. Even if you're over here and you're having all this suffering, then you kind of observe your own suffering, and then you suffer in your suffering in relation to your suffering. So you judge yourself for being a sufferer, right? So you resist your own resistance, and there's this whole thing, and you're looking across to the other shore of this ideal self, which is oriented to the world in a way that feels good and that can flow, and yet I'm over here, and it's like often we think of it as being like I'm either one or the other. And the middle path can even manifest even in times of bliss and flow and ecstasy and all that, or in really, the other end of that, which is all this suffering. You can actually kind of just say like, wait, I don't have to be all the way over here. I don't have to do anything, first of all, and second, I don't have to. Okay, fine, if that's not the state right now, where am I now, and what am I doing now? And obviously, if I'm spinning my wheels back into this pain, then that doesn't feel good. Can I, rather than like this being some kind of objective over here, can I just sit in the middle? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And without having to, it relieves us of the pressure of feeling like there's something to do, and somewhere to go and someone to be. Yeah.
I think this touches great into like our core topic of meaning.
Cool.
Because it's like when you start sort of applying pressure to yourself to be one thing or another, that's like where the suffering crawls in.
Yep.
And in Buddhism, there is like concrete mechanisms by which suffering and identity interplay in order to create this experience of like not that something's wrong,
Yeah.
And particular things like desire. So you have all these big lofty desires for like a huge house or like a beautiful wife or whatever, but one of several things will happen. There's a case-by-case breakdown. Either you get what you want and you kind of become bored with it, which is typical. You buy the fancy new car, and after a year it's just kind of your car. It's no longer like this object of extreme affection or interest. Or you fail to get what you want, and then you suffer because like, oh, I'm not good enough to manifest this thing, and I've been dreaming about it, and I've been trying to attract it, and why isn't it working for me? and you get into this like different realm of suffering. So traditional Buddhism maps out desire as a route of suffering and identity, aversion, so like really like fear and it's like trying to avoid your responsibilities or whatever, as another method, and then ignorance as like really the biggest one of just like rejecting information or pushing it away. And if you allow me to ramble a little bit more on this topic, I think this goes into one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about before, which
I'm
is
pouring my own tea, Andrei.
God damn it. So the idea of neti, I'm allowed to curse because I'm a tantric Buddhist. So neti, this is a traditional Buddhist exercise, and it means like not this, not that.
Right.
And like really like the central project of Buddhism is to inspect identity and to figure out what it is that I am, and not to associate myself with smaller versions of it.
Right.
So let's run through like a neti real quick, right? You start off by describing yourself as like materially, like what are you? My name is Connor. I live here and here I am. Maybe you can like tell me a little bit about yourself.
That's hilarious. Okay, so for the idea is that this interview is going to be a special featured interview on the Mirror for people in my audience who want more of these kinds of conversations, and maybe or maybe not by then, people in my audience will have gotten the message that I don't answer that question. So when I'm asked to give introductions, like on a podcast interview or something like that, I have got myself into all kinds of wonderful trouble and caused confusion on behalf of the hosts and all this a number of times because my answer to, so Connor, tell us about yourself. My answer is no. My answer is I don't do introductions. And so, I mean, my name is Connor. I live in Hawaii. I'm about to be traveling on the mainland for 4 months. Perhaps that's reflective too of the identity, right? I don't spend a lot of time I actually do spend a lot of time crafting an identity that feels good to me, but that identity I know is a passing, fleeting thing. It's an experience, and on the other hand, too, I know that it's also expressive of something. And that's kind of one of my questions to you about, like, I know we derailed from the neti, but I have a question about Tantra and desire and all that kind of stuff. But do your neti.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Okay.
You know me well enough.
I'll do it for him. Hey, I'm Connor, and I'm a spiritual coach, and I tell people how to feel good about themselves with a single conversation. And I drive my car, and I live in Hawaii, and I have my house, and I have my friends, and so you build up this like story about what it is.
He's hired.
Without any personal details, but it's but what you're asking the person to do in the neti exercise is to describe their lower self, right? This is like what people tend to identify themselves as, and I think you've gotten to a point where that lower identity feels constricting and kind of uncomfortable, but a lot of people will happily tell you, I watch NFL football on Sundays, and this is my favorite kind of beer, and like they have all these things that are built up about them, which they think is their identity.
Right.
And so once the person has finished telling me all that, then I say to them, okay, but look, now there's another version of you that's describing your own self. It's reflecting about it.
Right.
It's like this metacognition about yourself. And now you have two selves, right? Who's that? Who's that observer?
Right.
And as you're the observer, but then you start kind of like adding more and more descriptions about it. Oh, well, I can see images in my mind that are passing by, or phrases or words from my past. But these are all still like objective constructions of what is truly a subjective experience.
Right.
It's like direct experience of the now, the present moment. That is like absolute reality in Buddhism. That's like the bedrock reality of like, hey, this is like actually I'm experiencing this right now. Whereas all of the words and stories and creations are called relative truth. This is like the two truths doctrine of Buddhism, absolute versus relative truth.
Right.
So the neti exercise guides people through this experience of peeling away all the layers of relative truth until they get to the sense of their absolute truth. So I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this, I'm not that. And in the end, I'm just left with like I am, and there's nothing that I can follow up with.
Right. Exactly.
Good. So that was neti.
It's funny, it's funny, that very exercise, and this is why I respond this way when asked to give introductions on podcasts or anything. It has become kind of like a sort of a branded response. It's like, well, my answer to this when I am asked to give introductions is I don't. The reason why is because I think it facilitates this kind of conversation. So, Connor, why don't you give introductions? Well, let me tell you why I don't give introductions, right? It's because that's not what's actually going on here. If I were to paint a story about what it is that your cognitive constructs about the world that you think you live in, and sort of like offer you a box that you could relate to, and then construct a kind of relational, conditional possibility between like all that kind of stuff, like you can do that, and there's a lot of people out there who like their story and all this kind of stuff is a part of how they interact. And yes, I have a story, absolutely. Everyone does.
Many stories.
Everyone does. And at the same time, I think only really one story taken. It's like the same story. It's all one story, I think, just viewed from different angles. And so, it's funny that you talk about this neti exercise because I'm realizing too, that's exactly what's done often. I can think of multiple interviews I've had where this very conversation has either come up in the conversation or it's been how the conversation has begun. It's by saying like, the reason why I don't do interviews is because nothing that I can tell you that's a conditional statement about who the person who thinks that they're making their mouth move is. None of that is, it's not possible for any of that to be the true foundational solid truth that I think is actually medicinal and that I would like to reach in conversation, right? That's where I want to get. Like, it's fine to talk about stories and histories and memories and pasts. I think so long as, and I'm not like that's not I'm not placing this condition upon it that it needs to meet that. I'm saying that it's my desire to have those kinds of conversations where we get to that thing because it's possible. So, neti. It reminds me of apophatic Christianity, right? It reminds me of via negativa, like right. So there's this monastic tradition. I'm not sure when it's from, but there's an ancient Christian monastic tradition where the idea is that you can only say what God isn't. You cannot say what God is, but you can say what God isn't.
It's beautiful. So
it's kind of an interesting thing, right? You can use consciousness to bifurcate consciousness in a way that says, well, one of these is God and one of these is not, which is interesting given how neurolinguistic programming and things like that work, insofar as them saying, like, it's not so much about saying, like, if you're doing, talk about manifestation, right? If you're doing, like, affirmations and all this kind of stuff, we're moving towards something, not away from something. So it's funny that at this level you can say what isn't, even though there's really nothing that consciousness isn't either. You know what I mean? So it's really just kind of even that it is beautiful, and it's actually a limitation that need not necessarily be there either. The thing for me, and this is my question about that, I think will maybe finally get us to meaning, and that has to do with the tantric conversation, perhaps, is what I want to talk about. And again, like this via negativa, the apophatic stuff, like, okay, I can set criteria for what I can and can't talk about, or what I can and can't define, especially in terms of divinity or consciousness in this larger sense. And at the same time, if we were having that kind of intellectual conversation, I would say, yeah, and I'd follow it to a certain, down to a certain level. And at some point I would say, we actually can solve this whole thing by peeling it back a little bit and asking ourselves what it is that we want. What do we desire?
Okay.
Aha.
Oh, just
the whole pot. So
what is it we desire? Okay.
So the reason why I think that's such an important question is because we've talked about this. It's one of our earlier conversations. I remember it's like I was talking about desire as this kind of supernatural. It's like an ontological, metaphysical, connective force that leads everything through to an understanding of itself, like through some kind of like path of least resistance, especially when an agent of consciousness, like a human consciousness, allows itself to actually go with that flow, which is so counter to what human consciousness generally, the kind of default mode of human consciousness. We see objective reality and think of it as solid and think of it as limiting us. We think of this as a limitation, where it is, but not from the perspective of consciousness itself, not from the perspective of the soup in which we're actually participating in this whole thing, right?
Well, I guess I don't quite get it. You're talking about desire, but I think you're not talking about the Buddhist sense of it. Because the thing is, like, when we talk about desire...
He said passion. When I asked him this, he said...
Well, so it's like, like the thing is, okay, what do I really want? But then you've already involved the word I in it. So first it's like, which identity am I referring to myself? Like me as a human body, it's like, oh, well, I could really, I really want some soup. That's like a easy one. There's a body need, that's something I want.
Right.
And then, you look at the Maslow's kind of hierarchy of needs, and there's needs that are substantially higher ones, like social needs or self-actualization needs. The desire to understand the nature of reality, like said, ontology. So I guess, like, can you define what do you mean by self and what do you mean by want?
I think I've already come up with an answer, so I'm going to ignore you asking me to define those, and I'm going to say that the conscious mind is informed by something about it's like wanting the soup. So wanting the soup can just be wanting the soup. And people, when I get into the weeds with this with people, they're like, there's something that has the possibility of clicking that I haven't quite found the language for yet with people, because they're still seeing themselves as operatives kind of that are subject to the things in life that the conscious mind sees as pushing them, as kind of like they're these deterministic whatever agents that are just getting kind of like pushed around. And in my thinking, what's going on here is consciousness giving rise to deeper and deeper understandings of itself as itself, right? And I talk a little bit about this in the book, where there's a kind of a model of rapture even that is not terribly dissimilar from Terence McKenna's like transcendental object at the end of history or something like that. So when it's possible that the teacup kind of like knows everything that there is to know about being a teacup. It's possible that the teacup is fully oriented to itself in its teacupness and in its everythingness as some experience in space and time that isn't asking of itself that it be anything other than exactly what it is, or that it kind of even has agency to pivot through the world. It's a teacup. But a human consciousness, you can think about this in different, it doesn't really matter, but you could think of this, you could think of the animal, mineral, vegetable, whatever. You could think of this as going up the sort of ascension ladder of higher levels of sentience, and you get to human consciousness, and we spend most of our time thinking of ourselves as separate, spatial, temporal, Newtonianly determined kind of objects in the world. And getting to the desire, being able to answer the question what I want in a way that's not, well, I want soup. Well, if you wanted soup in that moment, I think what's most likely is that you would find your body just getting up out of the chair and getting soup.
Like without even thinking, you're saying?
Without even thinking, right?
And you're describing, okay, so let me summarize real quick, see if I got it so far.
Sure.
Instead of my own words. We talk about subject-object. So this is me and this is you. You're the object and the subject. And in many ways, the journey of Buddhism and the evolution of your consciousness is to get rid of this idea and instead experience full subjectivity. So you are part of my subject. This is the larger me, and in fact there is no object. When the light the light goes through you. It doesn't bounce off of you and come back to me.
Yeah.
It's not this duality, it just goes straight through you.
Right.
So then you're describing this sense of, okay, what do I really want as this transcendent being? Once I've reached that level, and great philosophers like Aurobindo write about this too, that conscious thought and trying to logic your way through stops existing. It's actually no longer necessary at all. All the chatter in the mind can go dead silent, and your body is acting as if on divine instinct.
Right.
It's just fully guided. So like you said,
Right.
get up and get the teacup or whatever it is you need to do. And then with the understanding that in that state, kind of like how the teacup is exactly what it is meant to be in the world, you yourself are the actor that's, So for me, when I operate at this level, and Connor knows this about me, it's in relation to a bhakti practice, which is a personal divinity. This idea that I speak to a goddess who I fully visualize in 3D, and she is my higher wisdom authority that I've trained on to be able to give me advice. And a lot of the time, if I ask her to just take over my body, she will walk me off into the jungle, just in a random direction, which the conscious mind would never grasp as even an option of something that you might want to do right now. And then I get there and I discover this immaculate field of extremely useful plants and medicinals and stuff, and I'm now I can reconstruct a meaning. My lower body, a physical world mind wants to create a meaning. It's oh, the goddess led me to this. Right. But in reality, the meaning is so beyond my ants eye view of reality that it could be that I influenced broke some twig, and then somebody later saw a broken twig and it affected their trajectory in a way that's way beyond my ability to even rationalize.
Absolutely.
And the whole project of trying to rationalize a purpose and meaning based on my limited worldview becomes increasingly futile, to the extent where I am just fully free to act and be without being tied into measurement of what is good and bad, or more or less, or going to be beneficial or not beneficial. Right. All of this falls away into just beautiful, blissful surrender of I just am. And I am this teacup. I'm already serving the purpose that was created for me, or not. If there was no purpose, I'm just it's just sort of happening. Does that kind of resonate?
Absolutely. And it also, yes. And it's funny because the way that I experience this is through hunches that aren't in any way distinguishable from just wanting something, having a desire, right? And to me, I know that the trajectory that I'm led on by following that instinctual pull to go somewhere or do something. And by this I mean in the most objective kind of 3D sense or whatever, like just like, for instance, there's a few different options that you have if you want to go get coffee or you want to go do something like that. And one of these places will just pop into my mind as the place, and lo and behold, you see someone that you haven't seen. It leads to a connection that then leads to another connection, and so just like that. And yes, so that is absolutely the case. And I also think, and again, this gets at the kind of thing that I don't exactly have the clearest way of wording yet, and that is that you actually can get there instantaneously and automatically just by answering the question of what you desire in the moment in which you find yourself. So I talk a little bit about it in the book. I say, go in the direction in which your body is already moving. It's one kind of principle of this, right? So we're going on the way to something, and we have like this contrary notion in our heads that wonders if this is the right choice, or like is considering these other options, right?
Mm-hmm.
It landed on me one day, shortly before writing the book, that the solution to this has to do with trust. But trust in what? And that's part of the interesting thing, is trust in the simplest desires that it could be the silliest, simplest thing. I want to get pizza. I want pizza. And so, at least in my thinking, that desire for you to have pizza, especially, I mean, I'm not going to put criteria on it or qualify it, but there's something about us when it arises kind of spontaneously, and there's just an edge, like we talked about being in the middle. There's like, you can be just over the edge of like this being something that's a habit. It can be just over the edge of habitual and be like, yeah, I mean, but I want to, though. I want to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So do it. I think that process of us allowing ourselves to kind of be the actors, be acted by the hand of God or something like that, is this recursive kind of self-knowing, self-reflective consciousness coming into relation with itself as itself. Because it's allowing for the possibility to perceive synchronicity. Because when you follow that, you're always like, well, of course I'm in this field with all this, of course, and then your mind goes, yeah, but then there's this twig and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, yes, how easy is it actually for the conscious mind to say, this all somehow makes sense in its total mysteriousness, right? So that to me is like gets at this like sacredness of desire, like it's been landing on me, like, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's like there's something sacred about, in fact, there's everything sacred. In fact, it's exactly what's going on here. Like the fact that human sentient consciousness has chosen for itself the possibility of relating to itself in a way that doesn't just listen to that is the invitation. Can we just take that as the invitation and then be reminded, oh yeah, just be like this teacup. Like the teacup doesn't question its orientation to the world or what it's doing or its teacupness or anything.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's like way more transcendent than us because it knows
Exactly.
exactly what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, okay, in the words that you've used, I think, okay, to make it make sense through my perspective, one is that you're instructing people to train their intuition. This like kind of divine intuition knowing system.
Sure.
which eventually becomes more primary than like the system of trying to weigh good and bad. So like, okay,
Yes.
where does Buddhism say that desire brings suffering? You know, a desire brings suffering when you, for example, fail to get what you desire, and now you're applying this idea of good and bad to it. It's like, oh,
Right.
well, I had this desire, but I didn't get it, and now I feel bad, and I really, really wanted that pizza, and you know, how dare they have a sick day or whatever, and then like suddenly you're suffering, right?
Right.
But the way that this kind of mystical knowing actually operates, the way that I experience it, is that, okay, you know, I really want pizza, so I go to the pizza shop, Domino's or whatever, it's my favorite one, and then
Really?
yeah, I don't know, it's what they got here in town. They're closed, and now it's not the
There's
case.
Pizza Hut too.
Oh God, no. Okay, so definitely Papa John's is the worst. I mean, I think we can agree on that. All right.
Actually, where I come from, Papa John's was.
It's popping off. Okay, well, let's not get too distracted. But okay, so you really wanted the pizza. You went to the pizza place. The pizza was denied to you, and now you have kind of some options. One is you have the option to suffer.
Right.
Another option is to assume that also was always part of the divine plan.
Yes.
That this being closed now led you on a different series of dots, which influence different parts of the world.
Exactly.
And none of those are better or worse. They're just part of the ongoing experience. You don't know what the future has in store. Your ability to judge the future is very limited. And therefore, the best option you can is just to surrender and not ruminate, not second guess, not doubt. Just stay on the path and just jump to the next intuition.
Right. Okay, so you said something in there that is one of the. It's your Buddhism talking, and it's the thing to me which we're at Jump Ship.
Okay.
Do you know where that is?
No.
I thought he might, because we had this conversation. So we've had a lot of conversations, haven't we? I think it is good. So I think that so obviously putting my language into his language, it back into my language. It's the self-judgment that freezes that thing, like, and now you're like at this point where are you upset that you don't get the pizza? Or, like he said, can this also be part of that unfolding? Now, for me, and this is crucial, actually, and this gets at the meaning piece, is that the meaning of being led there is actually a continual thread that you can follow and feel good about being led there, right? So is it a value judgment? It is a value judgment. And the only thing that's negative, the only value judgment that I'm kind of like, well, obviously this causes suffering, is the self-reflection that leads you to some assumption or some identity or some belief or some orientation to the world that elicits suffering, so that sees it as bad or that sees something as something wrong here, right? And so now something's wrong because you've declared it as wrong. Everything that's not that is actually an open world invitation into becoming more like the teacup for me. So consciousness coming back into consciousness to perceive itself as just consciousness, yes. That's what's interesting, right? It's just consciousness. And I suppose at some level of this process of the enlightenment of everything, or like of rapture in this way, at least how I think of it, you get to a certain point and it's all kind of, I mean, I think heaven could maybe get a little boring after a while. So this is just theory, but you've got all of the angels of heaven pressed fully against the window pane of your awareness in this very moment, because what the fuck is he gonna say next? You know, like this is some primo shit, human experience. The invitation to bifurcate reality and meaning and all that kind of stuff, and to forget, to have come into this experience and forgotten our essential nature as something more like this, right? And so, to me, that unfolding and that kind of emergent unfolding of deeper understanding of self as self, at some level of scale, the value judgment of it all being divine and good and heavenly in that way is kind of arbitrary. But that's after I take off my earthly clothes. I think that's after this experience. In the meantime, consciousness is so constructed that coming back into itself as itself is actually everything is organized towards that purpose, in my opinion. And that is the simultaneously that's what's going on here, and it's the meaning of it. Talk about the meaning of life and stuff like that. The meaning of life is everything that you unconsciously know to be true in this very moment, without judgment, right? Without using your intellect to try and piece together like what all these things mean, and presence with the sheer fact of existence. And that is good. That's good. That's just damn good to me.
So okay, like, do I understand this correctly? We are in a state of kind of like flux between this nirvana or heaven,
Sure.
and then the experience of living, which in Buddhism is termed samsara.
Yep.
And it's kind of like this almost yin yang of the two interplaying, where our meaning is to get to the place of realizing that it is in fact all good. And that is like the great good, the great beauty of we can suffer,
Yes.
but we don't have to if we don't overly identify. And so this like movement of humanity from the world of suffering, samsara, into the world of nirvana, of like all is great, but then, you know, kind of flowing back and forth. There's an ebb and flow between it.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I think this is where like Buddhist philosophy also tends to branch off a fair bit. Like there's a version of it, you know, like early Buddhism would say, like this whole world is dog shit, it's just a big illusion, we're trying to get out of here as fast as possible, like forget this place, you know?
Right.
And then the later Tantra, it reevaluates that core assumption.
Right.
And it says that actually there's a way to combine the material and the spiritual into the sense that actually all is good. Like this reality that we are is beautiful. It's incredible.
Right.
It's enriching, and it's nothing to be running away from. None of this like total spiritual bypass where you don't interact with the world anymore at all, and you have all these like great restrictions of what you're not allowed to do. You know, you're not allowed to handle money, you're not allowed to have sex, you're not allowed to do like all this stuff. Saying, no, actually that's all part of it. That's all part of the great fun. You know, like we're here to have fun. So like a big foundational part of the Earthman's philosophy was this idea of fun, of like the fun meter. You know, and like on a given, you know, any given experience, it can rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. For me, this is like a 9. I love doing this kind of like weird philosophy stuff. Yeah. And if your fun meter drops low, you can just do something else. You can leave the room or go somewhere else. And it's so trivial almost, but this is actually one of the greatest skills to develop.
That's an Earthman philosophy.
That's an Earthman
that
philosophy. It's comical and adorable, yeah. Well,
no, it's ideal. It's ideal. That's what we lose coming into adulthood, whatever the hell that means, however the hell that happens, from being this childlike consciousness that we come into. Children only care about falling from one fun thing to the next. A child is never not having fun if they can help it.
Right. And why shouldn't we be having fun? You know, like why should we allow ourselves to get wrapped up into suffering? You know, and then at a certain point, you know, on this like journey of fun, which by the way is very difficult. Like having fun on a regular basis takes serious meditation work, and like you really have to figure out the layers of your own, the functioning of your own mind, because there's many different ways that suffering can crawl into your life.
Sure.
If you're not kind of careful about it. But then eventually, at a certain point, the fun gives way for me to this divine intuition that we're speaking about, where, because by definition everything's good, like it's all good, it's all good.
Right.
So, you know, even the things that may have seemed to be suffering to other people or to your past self,
Right.
no longer have that teeth to them. And, you know, oftentimes acting in seva, service, for somebody else's benefit without any apparent direct like benefit to yourself is one of the most fun you can have, because it takes you out of your lower identity and it tosses you into this like larger identity of we are all this interconnected self-being.
Yeah.
So service for another part of myself is service to myself.
Yeah.
Non-violence, ahimsa, non-violence to the self also means non-violence to the rest of the world, because they're fundamentally the same.
Sure. It's interesting to me how you know what I would call these things like service and nonviolence. I would call them kind of like the natural byproducts, like the natural. It's like more like a side effect of consciousness being consciousness without condition. That, of course, if this is what's happening, which way does it go? Both? I don't know. Right? However this happens, of course, service would be a natural offshoot of that motion, that mechanical birthing process, that kind of like coming into being of self as self. So of course service, and of course non-violence, like, right?
Yeah, and I want to expand this one too, because this was like a big insight for me. Okay, so here we are in this world, right? For however mechanism it happened, we've been given everything. Like we have pretty much an infinity out there. We have an infinity within our own minds. We can be anything, do anything if we really set ourselves to it. And from the magnitude of this gift, the magnitude of this like giant self that we have, comes a natural curiosity.
Right.
You know, like I want to explore the world. I want to have as much as there's to offer. And this is where the philosophy of Tantra comes in. It's like non-renunciate. I want to experience as much of the world as I can. This curiosity lends itself to a natural gratitude practice. And, you know, for me, you probably know this, gratitude is one of the most important mechanisms for achieving happiness, for achieving non-suffering. But the gratitude is natural. You're curious about the world, like a kid coming into school on the first day, and there's always like blocks and toys. And it's like you're excited about it. You're grateful for it, that all these gifts that the goddess has given us.
So this is fascinating to me, because to what extent is one of the things in raising children is there's a huge, and I'm a Southerner, right? So there's a huge importance placed upon manners and things like that. And very often the child is asked to, in a completely arbitrary way, express gratitude or thanks for something when they are, in the moment that they got the thing, they're more taken by more curiosity in this very moment. Or it's actually quite possible that they do not give a shit. That's just like, I want to go do something fun now. Cool, thanks, person who brought me a gift. Yay. Right. So to experience gratitude, I think that gratitude and fun and excitement and receiving and the receptive, affirmative attitude of being, knowing that you are in the right place at the right time, guaranteed, actually, already without any effort on your part being required to like manifest yourself being in the right place at the right time. You are, full stop. It's actually a guaranteed. Mhm. And there's ways that our conscious mind can kind of look at that and say, no, I can list reasons. No, if this is what's happening, and there's this unpacking, packing, fractal, folding, unfolding, whatever that is, of meaning and maybe not meaning and desire and goodness that's only goodness relative to it, how it views itself, then what happens to these concepts like fun, excitement, gratitude? I can hear Joe Dispenza saying, gratitude, he says, gratitude is the ultimate form of receiving. That's like a thing. Gratitude is the ultimate form of receiving. So you get yourself in this grateful mindset, and from a manifestational perspective, you're inviting more in. And I'm like, well, hold on. What does gratitude mean? Because the extent to which I see my gratitude as something which is a condition, like I'm transacting with the world. That's my gratitude. It's like, I'm grateful, I promise, I'm grateful. And you're essentially like running a script that's really a transactional kind of a thing in consciousness. That's not the same thing as the sheer feeling of excitement and fun. And I don't think you can divorce those two. Like gratitude, excitement, fun. I think it's actually part of the whole package of childlike presence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think like in gratitude practice, the goal is very much to reach the feeling level of it. Like there's like mechanisms and there's tools you can try to use, but ultimately if you're not feeling it in your heart, you're not feeling the warm glow of loving compassion, of joy and fun, you're not actually experiencing it, then you're still in the world of words, still in the world of names, in like the world of conceptualization, rather than the world of direct experience.
Right.
So, but I do think that gratitude is something that does need inherent practice, because it seems like the operating system of the human, which is sort of survival oriented, has this mechanism called the hedonic treadmill, which I maybe talked to you before. But
no,
so
actually,
okay,
I don't think
so you know, like the philosophy of hedonism.
I'm going to check the light. Keep talking.
Sure. The philosophy of hedonism is the idea that I should just be packing my life with as much fun and joy as I can. But eventually, no matter how much of like a joy you're experiencing, you get reset back to zero. So you know, you again, like you are having an orgy every single day, and it's like this incredible experience for like a week, and then you're tired, you're kind of bored of it, you sort of know it happens, it's, you know, smelly or whatever, and you like the point is that like the hedonism kind of resets, right? Like there's only so much orgy you can get before it's just like kind of like boring. It's like the average every day, you know?
Well, but if that's the case,
right? So okay,
you're not having fun.
Right, you're not having fun. So, but this is where gratitude comes in. Is there's this natural mechanism? No matter how good I make my life, I'm tired of it. I'm bored, because you know the survival mechanisms of the human are about like, okay, well, what problems are going to arise? Like, how do I, you know, make sure that the plumbing doesn't break down or whatever it is? Like, I've got this property which has this wealth of beautiful plants and trees, and a lot of the time I wake up and I only see the weeds. I only see the problems, you know, that I have to take care of. And that's kind of the nature of the hedonic treadmill. And also the larger quest of like how to do happiness. Is like doing happiness is not super easy when every time that you upgrade your life, you just end up standing still. So the idea of this like hedonism, hedonic treadmill is like you're like on, in fact, a machine that's keeping you in place. And so the reason that gratitude as a conscious practice is important is because it's like counting your blessings in Christianity. It's like remembering all the things that are already going right in your life. And from there, all the love, all the parents, all the, you know, ancestors, all of your descendants, your children, your partner, your friends, your home, your ownership, the larger collective everything, interconnected with it all. It needs to be like built up a little bit. And once you have a little bit of a gratitude practice, it's like that ember just like blows and evolves, and suddenly you're just stopping on the side of the road to be in awe of like a flower that you're experiencing, where it comes out of this like world of words and into the world of direct experience. Yeah, what do you think about that?
I disagree.
Okay.
I disagree for like surely on principle that there's a way to practice that, and I think yes, practices. I have an interesting relationship with this, and I think you can get there, so to speak, to the extent to which there's anywhere to get. I think you can do it just by really like this is I think you can get there just by coming into a closer relationship with your heart's inmost desires about what it wants to experience, and the more you kind of shine your spotlight on the possibility of abundance in your life, even the more it opens up this kind of frame and these kind of very natural and very human, very childlike neural networks, so to speak, that whatever, that to me in my practice, like gratitude has seldom I think gratitude is it's not necessary because it's a side effect. It's I wouldn't say that it's a prerequisite, because in the same way that I really don't think there's any prerequisites. You know how I am about this. Like I think that there's a way into this which is right for the individual, and if it looks like gratitude, it's going to be gratitude, and precisely simultaneously with that are going to be other things that are indistinguishable as separate from that gratitude in the course of, like, call it manifestation, right, of a more abundant experience of this experience of consciousness of life. I think yeah, I'm obviously not saying don't practice gratitude. I'm saying when gratitude practice is practiced as a means to an end, it's likely to be for them, and I'm not saying this is what you were suggesting, it's likely to be this kind of transactional consciousness thing, and I don't think that's what you're saying. I think
no, I think it kind of is. You know, you want to suffer less. Here's a thing that you can do to increase your happiness, and that's kind of the transaction of it. So it's not like in direct flow. And I think this is one of the things that we've touched upon in the past, is this, for me, like there's definitely tiers. Like I from my training and the study of Buddhism, the mind moves through a series. And Ken Wilber, the mind moves through a series of levels. And so what's right for a higher level might not be what's right for a lower level. Like the actual teaching and practices and like the methods vary. So like when speaking about this very like last level, then yeah, gratitude is a natural consequence of simply operating at that stage of like being so fully unified with the world, and so in trust of divinity as your guide, that gratitude and curiosity naturally fall out of it. Actually, that's what I was saying before. I was agreeing with you. You know?
Yes, right.
But at the same time, in order to get to that level of awakening, I don't think any of us did it like when we were 15 years old. Like it's one of these things that takes a while to really fully untangle and manifest, and like your operating system, your computer, and your brain matures to the point where that becomes an option. And these other things, like other superpowers, the cities, the ability to not even have to think and just like directly move your body with your intuition, is not something that just like happens. It's something that has to be trained through these mechanisms. And then eventually, in Buddhism, there's this description like if the Dharma is your ship, right, and you're using it to like navigate and sail through this ocean, eventually you get to this massive chasm, like the rift in the ocean, where just like water falling off an edge, and you're like, oh shit, my like little boat is never going to make it over this thing. And you can either kind of like stay on this side and kind of paddle around,
right,
or you can surrender. you get rid of the ship, which by analogy means getting rid of the Dharma, getting rid of all conceptual thought,
And
all the
yeet
teachings.
yourself.
And yeah, yeet yourself headfirst into the abyss, which then you find to be actually totally safe
Dude.
ground. You know, it's like breathing underwater or something.
Hashtag yeet yourself.
Yeah, yeet yourself, breathe underwater. Yeah. You know, I say breathe underwater because that was one of my most formative psychedelic experiences. Was this sense of like having so much fear, you know, so much fear of the experience, so much fear of losing the self. And as if, like, if you can imagine being underwater and thinking about taking a breath, like, how scary is it to try to like inhale this like big lungful of water? That's like one of the scariest things that I can actually conceptualize of voluntarily doing. It's full suicide. And then, you know, in the state, that's actually what's required of you to like really get through that fear, to fully release, to fully surrender, feels like taking a deep breath of water.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's metal, and a lot of Buddhist stuff is pretty metal.
That's metal.
Yeah, you know, it's just kind of like, you know,
that's what I've been listening to all day. Yeah.
Obsession with death kind of like focus, but
wow.
Yeah, and then the full release comes, and then from there, all these things just fall out of it naturally. So of course, you know, I salute you in your practice of trying to put people directly into that end state and put them in contact with it.
Yes.
So that then all the things can unfold without this like mountain climb of different studies along the way.
What he's referring to is a conversation that he and I have had that I've thought a lot about it. I thought about how I might even respond to this kind of thing formally in some written capacity or something like that. And that is that I've come to kind of like a middle ground with this, believe it or not. And that is that I don't deny that there are modes of consciousness, and that those modes of consciousness, just call every one of those modes of consciousness a different kind of orientation to the world, because it's a set of beliefs or something like that that inform, they kind of act as a kind of subconscious heuristic that's filtering the information that you get and informs like what your perceived degrees of freedom are in any moment. Does that make sense? Like an orientation to the world. Like, so you've got information coming in and well, I happen to be oriented to the world in this way that abnegates my power. So that's one of these modes that I've come up with, like the self-abnegative, right? So it's like I can be trusting in life, like, oh yeah, it'll all work out. It'll all work out. And I can even say, like, not only will it all work out, I am somehow an agent that has choice in the matter and can flow with it and trust that it'll all work out and all that kind of stuff. And I can do that while still subconsciously operating on the assumption that God is an asshole and that say life sucks. So it'll all work out, but ultimately what I'm actually up against, so to speak, is this kind of this unfolding that isn't an unfolding that's all good, right? So that's one of these like modes of consciousness. And what he's talking about is my conversation with him in the past, where there's these layers, these levels of consciousness in Buddhism, in Ken Wilber's philosophy, and all that kind of stuff. And I don't deny that there's these instances of consciousness, these modes of consciousness, but I would not use the word level of consciousness. One, because it implies, the implication most of the time is that a person's level of consciousness, that this mode that they're interacting in is a whole lot more solid than it actually is. This is, I've thought a lot bit more about this since we last talked about it. So that mode of consciousness for them, this kind of plane in which they think of themselves as existing, is a whole lot more solid and a whole lot more kind of packed into their subconscious than it actually is. And so I have had conversations with people who come to the conversation completely limited. I mean, they're not just self-abnegative. I mean, that's like in these like 4 levels of consciousness, the 4 modes of consciousness that I've kind of delineated, which is not dissimilar from Ken Wilber, from Buddhism, that's like second from the top. Top just means the least defined.
Mm-hmm.
And the least defined and the most oriented to the thing as an unfolding, in which service and things like nonviolence are the natural product.
Right.
So that's the all goodness of it. Is like, of course, right? That's what I call the teleological, the telos, the expansive. It's naturally kind of expansive and conspansive, and is kind of coming into being in relationship with itself as itself in its natural operations, like what it's doing. But I've had conversations with people that are totally a Newtonian billiard ball being pushed around by the circumstances of the objective world that they see themselves as not really even being much of an agent in.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of existentialist, nihilistic, whatever, and it's like life definitely sucks, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
doubling down on that with the words that I'm using. And I regularly have conversations with people. I would say about 90, let's say 97%
Okay.
of people. I think given enough time in the conversation, I'm talking about, I've got an hour and a half with them. Within an hour and a half, 98, 97% of people get there completely. Even if them having come into it, it feels very, very small and very, very limited and very, very determined and very, very helpless and hopeless and fearful and all of those things, right? Oriented to the world in a way that is scarce and not good, that doesn't feel good to them. And we can get there fast. So that's why I reject that what is happening here is that this mode of consciousness informs itself to such an extent that it forms this bedrock that really takes all this effort and work to getting to the next one. Whereas actually it's more like a cloud that you've just kind of sunk into, and we can touch down on the thing and it's like, oh shit, that's right. Oh my God, this feels so much better. Holy crap, this feels so much better than that crap. Now, here's the interesting thing about it, right? You can do that, and it's like, this is what I call in my conversation with people. I call this when we've touched the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It's my favorite moment in conversation where we touch the bottom and then there's silence because there's nothing. Truth, I say, truth has walked into the room, or truth speaks for itself. When truth walks into the room, it's like there's nothing to say in the presence of the Tao. And so we get there and we sit there, and usually in conversation, I wait for them to say something, because guaranteed the next thing that they're going to say is their conscious mind coming up with some objection to what I think of as capital T truth.
Yeah.
Right? It's all good. And so that's basically, I can now formulate that objection in a clearer way than I think I did last time. And it's just that these modes aren't, in my experience, do not concretize this bedrock, this kind of like foundation that has to be chipped away at with all of this work and practice. It actually can be, you can rock it right there. The question is, what do you do then?
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, like, and I don't know if like we even have a really disagreement here about that.
I wouldn't expect that we do, actually,
yeah, it's like, in my language, people often have a peak experience, which is like several layers potentially ahead of where they manage to find themselves, including all the way down to the bottom. Like you said, maybe 98% or maybe a few can't do it. But that's like a peak experience, or like a glimpse down the well is another way Buddhists sometimes say it.
Really?
Yeah, it's like, you like just get a peek, you have like taste the water. But then, all the previous conditioning and programming that you've collected through your life, all the neural networks, they start to peak up, and then you said the person starts to have like some objections, or start mentalizing again. They kind of come down a level because that's what's more comfortable, what's familiar to them. So like the typical average Buddhist path takes, somewhere in like the 5 to 10 year range of substantial effort, because you kind of are really reprogramming so much, and it takes time to like physically rewire all those nervous systems, all those neurons, the synapses, and everything. But
Wow.
like, so like us as teachers, I believe we're needed on a more regular basis. Like the way that my experience with my guru is kind of like the best friendship ever. He was like my grandpa,
Yeah.
and we're going through,
Earthman.
yeah, the Earthman, and it's, like it was kind of whimsical. A lot of the time it was playful, but really the point of it was that I got to experience seeing him in a broad variety of situations, including very stressful ones, illness and death, and arguments and debates, and ultimately seeing how that truth, that capital T truth, shines through him to illuminate that situation and to make it suddenly fall into flow.
Yeah.
Miracles start to happen
Yep.
again. And being exposed to this over and over and over again is what allowed me to reach a little bit closer to imitating him.
That's phenomenal. That's funny because I've taught when I think of Buddhism as a highly like epistemologically relativistic. There's the subjective truth, or there's the like appearances of the world, and then there's what? There's to me there's this ineffable center. There's like this singularity. There's something going on here. Yes, other than the contents of our perception. Our perception is somehow in my opinion, like a meaningful projection from that center, inviting itself back into itself through the opportunity of this human experience to see itself in this world of sights and sounds and colors. It's so weird. And yeah, so it's cool because I didn't expect you to say capital T truth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because when I think of your Buddhist training and the intellectual position on it, I that's one thing where, for me, when it comes to non-duality, it's almost like what I think ex-Christians do. Ex-Christians will have their religious trauma and purity culture and all this kind of stuff, and then they'll totally reject it. And I call that, they'll reject all spirituality in some cases, and certainly all religion and all this kind of stuff. And when I meet Christians who don't, I'm like, you came out with all this religious trauma. I talked to a Jehovah's Witness the other day, ex-Jehovah's Witness. Oh my God.
Yeah, I met a few.
And Jehovah's Witnesses, it's a fascinating denomination, and absolutely no judgment. They're doing their thing. And at the same time, this woman came out with all this religious trauma, and I'm like, you have faith. You went through all that and didn't do what I call throwing the holy baby out with the holy bathwater.
That's fine.
You can. There's still something going on here. So she still had faith, like in God and in life, and she might call it the universe, she might call it God, but she's like interested in all this stuff still after all that religious trauma. So I think that the conscious mind can do something similar when it goes down the non-dual path, and that our intellect can inform sometimes a way of thinking about knowledge or thinking about truth in a way that throws the epistemological baby out with the epistemological bathwater, so that no, it's full relativism, full stop. And that to me that's the thing, is like, I'm fine with everything being relative. I'm fine, whatever, I'm fine with everything being relative, save for the one thing that is this ineffable center of all of it, which speaks all of the meaning that could ever possibly be experienced. There's something going on here. So like,
and we're talking about the unity consciousness in particular here.
Yes, this is the kind of thing that we touched on.
Yes, I mean, I think this is great, and so like for me, one of the hallmarks of spiritual attainment, if you will, is the ability to hold paradoxical and opposing viewpoints at the same time,
Absolutely,
without recognizing them as paradoxical. So,
yes.
like, if we kind of get into,
Can I modify that? The way I think of that, and this may be maybe informed. The way I would say that is, you can recognize them as paradoxical, but without them being contradictory.
right? It's like
in
it's
your
like,
life, there's no cognitive dissonance there.
it's not bad.
It's not
right?
bad, right?
It's not
right,
bad.
right.
It's all good. Yeah. So
I love it.
so like, okay, let's talk about this paradox thing.
Yeah.
So okay, like I think a big part of the spiritual journey, as you're saying, is the movement from this idea of separateness, or your lower self, and like us as lower self, subject object, into the unity consciousness. Like that is like one of the major big paths that people experience. That's kind of like the ascending force, But then there's more that happens, in my opinion, is the recognition that separateness was never bad either.
Correct.
Right? And so now you're holding the opposites. You're holding the paradox in hand that, yes, I am my lower self. This is Andrei. I study Buddhism. I do some computer programming, and etc. And so my lower self is just as valid, and I don't have any apprehension about talking about my lower self, right, or describing it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I am Andrei, the divine being. Like in Rastafarianism, they like say I and I, like the small I and the big I. And it's I and I. You're holding both of these things at the same time. So I guess we're kind of getting...
Is that what that's...
That's what I think it means. I'm not a Rastafarian.
I had no idea. That's awesome.
Hopefully I'm not misrepresenting that.
Okay, that's cool. That's really cool.
It is really cool. Now, Rastafarianism has a lot of amazing stuff in it.
Just a couple white guys doing their thing.
Yeah. I mean, Anyway, so then, okay, so let's talk about non-duality. Yes, it's true. It is in fact true, but then there's more going on too.
Aha!
Okay, so let's talk about non-duality through the lens of like Ken Wilber, and you've heard this a bunch of times. He's tired of it, but so
I love it.
Okay, so for any given like potential paradox, anytime that you're holding a paradox like this, and it goes for every paradox, there is a little trick that you can do to explore different aspects of that paradoxical non-duality. And so again, let's say lower self or smaller self, larger self. Those are my like paradoxes, right? Okay. And in one sense, yeah, it's true that I am Andrei and I'm this lower being and my sensory equipment is in this body and not in that body. Then there is the larger self, and that's also true because my self is interconnected. I eat every day, I defecate, everything I touch is in fact influenced by me. There's this kind of like light cone of all information that I can reach and all information that has reached me. This is like Penrose.
Penrose.
And but then also it is the case that both these things are true. It is the case that I am both my lower self and my higher self at the same time. So that's like the two thumbs up version.
I love that you're doing that. I've seen him do this exercise with a number of other contradictory concepts, like truth statements. And I've never heard this one. This is interesting. This
is kind of the biggest one, right? This is like the non-duality of divinity and self. Okay, so small self, big self, both are true. That's a valid perspective. It's also the case that neither of them are true, because we are still only applying our conscious mind rational language to this, right? Like there could be something entirely different explanation going on, like in the sense of just whatever logical positivism, which is not true. That's a debunked, philosophy. But there might be some other perspectives which we have not totally considered, where it's neither the case that I am just a lower self, nor is it that I'm this big divine self. Maybe I only can influence part of the universe, not all of it. Maybe there's like hierarchies of divinity, and I'm like part of one piece of the hierarchy. Like there's different versions of this truth that could also exist.
Yeah. And
then in, like the Ken Wilber twist is that you have these four obvious options, right? true, this one's true, they're both true, neither of them are true. That exhausts our possibility space using the logical mind. But divinity is inherently much more mysterious and much more infinite than like a simple logical case-by-case breakdown. This is getting technical, but we've talked a lot
No,
about
that's great.
like Gödel's incompleteness theorem and the idea that for any axiomatic logical system, there's always more truth that is unreachable, given the fundamental axioms of that system. And that's a proof in mathematics. Like mathematics has proved its own limits.
Yes.
So me applying a logical system...
In other words, it's proved its own limits by proving that it can't prove itself to be true within its own...
Right. It can't be true all the time for all truth possible. So we know there's more truth than what logical axiomatic systems can deliver. And where I'm going with all this is that ultimately there's a fifth option. You know, it's true, A is true, or B is true, or both A and B are true. Neither of them are true. And then there's the fifth option. This like idea that my own conceptualization of this is limited by the framework of knowledge, and that divinity being fundamentally mysterious and fundamentally infinite, there's actually even more cups to hold at the same time. So like when holding a paradox, you're holding so much more than just these four options, or even just the two that you started with.
Right.
So this is where, like in the past, I think we've had a little bit of like debate, because I don't position the unity consciousness as like higher above the other options. I'm holding them all in parallel, including my lower self and its needs, but with the understanding that the unity consciousness is true. Like that is a true reality. And that means that I have to adapt my behavior to it being true, even if it's not the totality of the truth and not even if it's the root level truth, but simply a truth that exists, that is a big truth, that is like a capital T, like large scale, big picture truth, but not necessarily on a hierarchy with the other truths. They're all true together.
See, that rings so strangely to my sensibilities about the nature of truth, right? So the reason specifically in the case of say unity or disunity, either unity is true, and either everything is either unified and not unified. I mean, or it's not unified.
Never was, you know.
Yeah, or it's unified and not unified, or it's neither unified nor not unified. Fifth option in this case is question mark.
Right, and that's also the beauty of the fifth options. You just relax into what the fuck, you know. I don't even know.
Right.
And that's true. It's surrender.
Right. What I appreciate about the exercise is that it's a way of like, I think it's the purpose of it is to get beyond categorical thought on things, right? To me, I don't see why non-dualism has to imply this kind of it really has to do with whether or not non-dualism does or does not imply unity consciousness. That's actually what this all stems from for me.
Well, it definitely implies it, yeah. I mean, no matter the system, like that is a truth. Like the unity is there, but the question is that unity supposed to be on a higher, you know, like plane than the other truths?
Okay, that's clear. Claro. Because see, I wasn't okay. To me, then you're asking the question, what does it mean for it to be higher?
Yeah.
Right? You know, like you said, you don't. Like, here's a good example, actually. Now I'm thinking of all kinds of examples. It says in the Wujin Pian, it says, you know, you must practice the great concealment while you are in the marketplace. It says things like, are you really going to go off to the mountaintops to watch the wind blow the reeds? You know, I love it, right? So they're like, they're kind of denouncing this renunciate path, and they're like, no, boots on the ground is what you're being invited to participate in, not eating 1 grain of rice per day, right? And it's like it's a little bit like I use as an example people who use Ramana Maharishi as a as like the goalpost is Ramana Maharishi for whatever 7 years or whatever, not able to like feed himself, right? It's like you can do that. That is possible. You can go and you can have an answer to any question because of the nature of consciousness. You can do that. And here's the thing. It was Ramana Maharishi's life that called him and invited him to be an example of that. An example, whatever. I mean, like, it's possible. Okay, so it's his life that invited him to have that experience, and he had it. For you then to go make it an objective of yours, I find silly. Right. Now, that's when I say like putting unity consciousness on a pedestal.
Right.
That's what that looks like, and I think that's absurd.
Right.
So we're being invited to live the life that we're being invited to live. Wow, is that a redundant statement? We are being invited to live the life that we're being invited to live now. And that's it. That's like actually all of it. That's full stop. That's all you ever need to know about anything. And in that kind of unfolding of the present moment, your body will naturally find itself getting up and going to get soup, like in our earlier example. Like it'll just happen. Or you'll find yourself wandering into the woods, or you find yourself going to get pizza, but they're closed, right? So all these examples. Well, that's clear to me, man. Yeah. It's not that unity consciousness is an objective, because I'm explicitly opposed, whatever, to there being somewhere to go or something to do or someone to be other than who you're invited to be in this moment.
Yeah, it's the journey.
And that's the destination and the journey and the destination. And it's right? They're the same thing. They're literally the same thing. So, because like we said, you guaranteed, you can take it to the bank. You're at the right place at the right time, here now.
Yeah, what a joyful way to live your life is when you no longer think in that destination style thinking, right?
Yes.
So then you're just enjoying the experience that you're having right now without thinking about a future that does not exist outside of the story in your mind.
That's the kind of desire that leads to suffering that you were talking about earlier.
Especially when it's mixed with identity.
Mixed with what?
Identity.
Right, when it's me who fill in the blank.
Right, yeah. And it's like smaller I, not the larger I.
So I think we actually resolved that. That's funny because that was one of the initial things about this whole conversation that we came to like talk about was like resolving this whole Ken Wilber unity thing. And it's like, actually, there's nothing.
Right, yeah. And I mean, it is funny that we found our way there because I didn't expect more. But yeah, you know, like we're talking about non-duality, right?
Right.
And then the duality is like lower self, higher self. We're talking about non-duality. Obviously, picking just unity would be a duality, right? Like at the exclusion of all the other ones, that would be a duality. So I want to talk, I guess, like a little bit briefly about the evolution of this concept of non-duality throughout the era, throughout the time. So like in old school Vedanta Buddhism, all of this non-duality was seen through the lens of emptiness. That like, again, the world is illusionary, that this like material world is just like kind of false, and that that like non-duality was there as a concept, but it was this like devoid non-duality. And it wasn't until really like the tantric non-duality that the lower self was fully exercised in it, so you can actually play in the world, which is not illusionary. It is like, this is the real concrete world too. This is the experience that we are currently having fun with, that is currently unfolding,
it's really fun.
that we were summoned in to do.
It's like the alchemical redemption of matter from the prior assumptions about the value of matter. Otherwise there would be nothing to redeem it from other than our preconceived notions about
Yeah.
the world being like I've actually heard this out of the mouth of a Hare Krishna here on the island, that he said, everything is Krishna, everything is Krishna, everything is Krishna. And then, I kid you not, like almost immediately following that up with saying that this world is like a bathroom. It's a bathroom to the Lord. This world is nothing. It's shit.
Right. Yeah.
And that makes absolutely no sense to me.
No, it makes no sense. It's funny. I've also have a great Krishna monk friend who I love talking to, a very great academic. And it's. I mean, I think one of the most beautiful things that he said to me is like, yeah, the whole world is Krishna, and you are not Krishna. And it's this beautiful, again, version of non-duality kind of laced into it. This idea that, yeah, we're all part of this larger self. But
what does he mean when he says you? Right?
Well, he said, yeah, the lower me self, participates in it, but it is not the totality of it. This is kind of what he's applying to.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's affirming kind of a non-dual stance of your own individuality while also being a part of a larger divine system in which we are, maybe just a little piece. And,
right.
But I must say that us as a little piece is in no way diminutive.
No.
Because if you consider just physics, physics, matter and energy are not created and destroyed as far as we're aware in physics. You can convert energy to matter and vice versa, but it can never be fundamentally eradicated, which means, and this directly follows in my mind, that we, the universe cannot exist without us. The universe literally cannot exist without me sitting here talking about it. Amen. It's if we have Indra's web, it's interconnected web of all things. You can't just take a cut out a hole and rip it out.
Right.
That doesn't make sense. So this illusion of separateness was never there, and therefore your meaningfulness is very, very extreme. In fact. So let's talk about nihilism briefly.
Awesome.
This directly links into it. Nihilism is very, very funny, and this is almost like a direct Ken Wilber quote. But nihilism is very, very funny because people recognize the emptiness that Buddhism saw, but then they assign meaning to it. They think it's bad. It's oh, nothing means anything, and I'm so sad about it, and I'm going to smoke cigarettes and run wild, try to kill myself. But that is actually a direct contradiction, right? Because if nothing has any meaning, then there is no meaning to be derived from the fact that there's no meaning. But you're actually fully liberated at that point. There's no meaning.
Right.
And that means I don't need to feel any particular way about it. And that means I can just be in the flow and do whatever feels right in the same kind of way that we're talking about.
So let's tie this up nicely, because I think we're getting close to time. And
cool.
The question then becomes, what does meaning mean, right? Mm-hmm. Then if what you mean by meaning is the conscious stories that you've woven about value, some kind of subjective or even objective, some kind of value that something has because of some other value, right? It's just this kind of infinite regress of of these value judgments and truth statements that form a story, that form an orientation to the world, that inform a mode of consciousness, right? Then that's the kind of meaning that will carry you right along into more suffering. And when I'm have this passionate kind of intellectual project to kind of resurrect meaning from the kind of grip of this kind of existentialist philosophical, the kind of status quo mindset of many young people, and it seems even in Western philosophy or academic philosophy, that it takes for granted existentialism. That everything's inherently meaningless, so if you want to live a meaningful life, You might want to come up with a story that feels good to you. So here's the thing about that. My wholehearted, passionate, where I call absolute bullshit, is that I'll repeat what I said earlier, is that the meaning of life, all meaning that could ever possibly be present or available to you, is contained in this moment, in the moment in which you exist. And that's it. And in fact, all of it is there. I mean, my God, how powerful and how potent and how pregnant is the moment if the meaning of life, it says in the Gospel of Thomas, recognize what's in front of your face, and that which has been hidden will be revealed to you. So it's right there. It's nearer than the tip of your nose, and at the same time, we abnegate and we reject and we say, well, life is meaningless. So you might want to come up with a story, which is the very thing that got us into. So it's like, my story is that it's all meaningless, and I'm doing that kind of value judgment thing about meaning. Remember, it's all good? Well, the meaning is present and available and good. And you don't have to search for it or go looking. It's actually all right here, right now. So the meaninglessness is the meaning that we derive from here, basically. But the meaning here is a given. That's kind of that's the idea there. Is that it depends on what we mean by meaning in this case. And meaning, in terms of my conscious stories, will not get me there. Not even if I paint the existentialist picture of trying to say, like, well, I've done the whole value judgment thing, it's all meaningless, so you might want to come up with stories. That's actually how you got yourself into that situation in the first place, of thinking that it's all meaningless, and that causing you the suffering of having to surrender to the meaningless, of like, oh, it's all meaningless, so this sucks, right? Life sucks. Talking about that abnegative mode of consciousness. You subconsciously actually are carrying around the belief that life actually sucks and that God's actually an asshole. And you're just going to get by. So when I say meaning, the meaning of life, just in the same way that fun and excitement and gratitude and all of these kinds of childlike ways of being in the world fold in on each other and like orbit really close into the center of this singularity at the center of all of it, well, meaning is packed right in there. Like, I say this in the book, I say, go ask a child what the meaning of life is. And they'll go like this. Minecraft?
Yeah, before running out to have more fun.
Yeah, like Minecraft? Like, you, with your conscious mind as an adult who's come up with this question as if it can be answered in language, is saying, what's the meaning of life? There's no such thing in the way that the conscious mind looks for an answer to that question. The meaning of life is, it's a given. It's very, feels very Christian almost, like it's a given, the life.
I think like to tie in with what we were talking about is like if there's a small I and a big I, right? Mm-hmm. There's like a small version of meaning and a big version of meaning. And the small version of meaning is tied to identity, and it's tied to what you're trying to achieve or gain or whatever your story is. Whereas the large meaning is inherent. It's like a principle of reality that the unfolding of all things is just inherently true. And even if we don't understand necessarily what our role is, we have impact. Like everything is interwoven, everything's interconnected. So for a second, we imagine this reality to be like a big machine, and we don't know what the machine's doing, but what we do know is that we are a piece of that machine. And therefore, all of our actions are inherently meaningful. But again, the trick that we talked about before is that like, if there's no pizza, there's no pizza, and that's not like good or bad. It's like attaching like a value judgment to that big meaning is not sensible.
What if in that moment I chose my orientation to the world informed the notion that there not being pizza is actually good? Because if it's all good, it's actually essentially good that I was brought here in this moment. The inkling that I had, the whisper from the goddess or whatever that said, go get pizza, didn't actually have anything to do with pizza. It had to do with the ability to communicate to my conscious mind in a way that my conscious mind would come up with a reason to allow my body even if it's a little one, to come up with a reason to allow my body to go to the place that does the thing, that actually leads to the next thing. So when I find myself in those situations, I say, well, then why am I here? Hold on. You know what I mean? Like, okay, that's exciting to me because it's like, oh, that means that something else is going on here. I thought I came here for pizza. So, yeah.
There's like a bigger world of magic is what I've come to realize. Like, okay, so like magic thrives in like a little bit of chaos. Like in our life, as we get used to a set routine and a set way of being and a set identity, we like calcify, we like get stagnant into like a statue. And then like the opportunity for magic and alignments and all this like weird supernatural phenomena, it's no longer there. You know, if my life is that I wake up at 9 a.m., I drive to my job, you know, I whatever, grind away and drink coffee, talk to my coworkers, and I go home exhausted, and then I like watch TV and go to sleep. If that's what I do day in, day out, there's very little space for something exciting and magical to come into it, right? But like for me, and maybe I think you'll probably concur, there is like a little bit of a supernatural twinge to this, because like when I go to that place to get that pizza that's not there, the unfolding that comes is usually ridiculous. And and a lot of the time that story for me doesn't end with there not being pizza. Like one very direct story of this kind of experience, I was sitting you know, at the parking lot, and after a day of work or whatever, and the goddess says, "Go to Burger King, get a burger," right? And like, you know, I haven't been to Burger King for years and years. There's like no way. And I get there, I'm ordering my like veggie burger, and the woman who's serving me, she's like, "Oh, it's like so expensive, and you know what? I'm giving you a second one for free." And so I got a free veggie burger, like out of nowhere, just by following this intuition. And then like later that day, you know, like half an hour later, my friend calls me and she's in distress. So I figure, oh, it's a good time to practice some seva. And I go over to her place and I just happen to have food for her already ready.
Veggie burger.
Right, but like the whole thing is like kind of bizarre and mysterious, right? That like I started it with just like a kind of an absurd request from the goddess, which I didn't understand at all. I go there, it doubles down, I get way more than what I paid for and bargained for. And then immediately afterwards, I had a reason to give that free food away.
By listening to that nudge, that hunch, you become an agent of the whole thing.
Right.
Coming into, you're allowing itself to do its thing, which is self-relation, which is this like self-iterative, recursive, self-referential process of self-understanding. Self. It's like very Upanishads, you know, it's like all is self. So if that's the case, I mean that's a whole other can of worms. But if that's the case, then I've been using the metaphor lately of like stopping white knuckling the wheel, like just
Jesus, take the wheel.
Jesus, take the wheel. Jesus, take the wheel.
Yeah.
What do you think, Andrei?
I feel great. I think any more would just be recircling. You know.
We've had some technical issues, so we'll see how this turns out. I love how like things have died. Like
this part of the flow. Yeah.
This camera died. My phone died. It's all you. Right. So it's all your phone.
I mean, it's actually kind of to that weird mystical point again where you start wondering about these things. So, okay, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 devices die, recorders of various kinds, and right now this entire thing is being carried just by my cell phone.
Correct.
So, you know,
and we'll see what happens. Right?
You know, maybe that's probably how it was meant to be. We had this like whole fancy like plan or whatever, but you know, at the end of the day, I don't even know. Maybe we just had a fun conversation. We didn't record anything at all, and that'd be great. You know, that would still be part of my unfolding. That would still be part of my experience. That would be still affecting every step that I take from now on.
Amen.
Amen.
Let's do it. I love you too, man. I love you too, buddy.